Mr. Nixon, are you ready to get nostalgic?
Why not?
We're going to go back in time. You had run for personal election in 1962, 63, 67, 71, 75, 77, and 1981, and your party had never won government. So I wonder what your expectations were going into the 1985 election.
I have to say negative. I was impressed with David Peterson. On a personal basis, we had by chance sat beside each other in the legislature in opposition and become pretty good personal friends. I'd asked him to come up and speak to a Liberal meeting in Burford in my constituency, and he did a great job for me. I knew what he was capable of. But Bill Davis was ruling the roost and doing what appeared to be a good job, a very acceptable job to the electors of Ontario. We had a little trouble finding anything to be critical of, but we were able to do that. But we were approaching the situation, and I was thinking after my years of trustee service, maybe my friends in Ottawa would recognize me with an appointment to the Senate. So I sent out feelers saying I wouldn't turn this down. And Keith Davey, whom many Liberals would remember as the guy that looked after Liberal affairs in Ontario and elsewhere too, his response to my feeler was, "It's doable, and I'll pass it on," which meant that he'll think about it himself, thank you very much. But nothing ever happened, and I was interested to hear somewhat later on that we'd moved on to the leadership of David Peterson, and he'd mentioned to the officials in Ottawa, "I don't want Nixon to go to the Senate. I want him to stay here because I don't want a by-election and I don't want to lose a member." So I was kind of reluctant entering the election of 1985, and I won handily and was amazed at how well we did. We didn't win the election, but we were the second largest party, and the new premier was facing a majority opposed to him.
Well, that's what I want to pick up on, because when Bill Davis retired in, I guess it was January or February of 1985, and Frank Miller took over, did you think that would change the dynamic enough to give you guys a shot?
Well, David Peterson was a young and very attractive and capable person, but still we'd been pretty much inured to the feeling that the Tories had their hands on all the levers, and we would do our best and we would come back with whatever we could get and go on for some salvation that was in the future. I certainly didn't have it in my mind that we were going to win the election, nothing like that at all. But Davis had left the leadership rather unexpectedly. He'd resigned the premiership, passed it over to Frank Miller, and I think people looked at Frank and saw a good, trustworthy guy that was there for a long time beforehand, wore a nice Scotch plaid coat that was quite attractive, but somehow or other they were ready to look at this new guy, David Peterson, and think about that. So we did remarkably well, and it was quite exciting election night, I'll tell you. And
follow up on that, if you would. Like election night, it's basically a tie. The Tories have 52 seats, but you're close behind at 48. The NDP hold the balance of power at 25, but your party got the most votes.
I think I even got a phone call from somebody up in Sudbury saying, "What are we going to do about this?" And so it was starting to get quite exciting, that's for sure.
Was that Eli Martell?
Yes,
who
it
phoned?
was.
Yeah.
And I had my run-ins with him before that and afterwards too. We never fit together exactly like hand in glove in the legislature. But he was a good member, a very capable guy too. But we could say, well, in fact, we've done very well in the election. It's a matter of time until we can overcome the Conservative minority government. And so we made plans for that.
Let me pick up on that, because 10 years earlier, in 1975, when you were the leader, The Liberals and the New Democrats had enough seats to overthrow Bill Davis and throw him out should they want to, right? He only had a minority government that year, but it didn't happen. So what made 1985 different?
Well, I suppose the leadership of the two parties, myself and Stephen Lewis, that we'd met previously. As a matter of fact, he had come to visit me at the farm, ostensibly with an offer that I couldn't refuse, that I should think of joining the NDP.
I think it was Jim Renwick.
Renwick was there, that's it, yes. You were not there, were you?
I was not.
Oh, okay. Anyway, I remember sitting around the dining room table. Dorothy put on a nice lunch. We had a good discussion, and I said, no, I had many aspects of my own political philosophy that was similar to the NDP, and that I would not find anything about what they were doing offensive, but I was loyal to the Liberal Party, and I felt that we were making headway and was going to stay where I was. It's interesting that way back in 1943, my dad left the Liberal government, the Hepburn government, over an internal problem. And he thought at the time, if he had joined the CCF, it was then called, he thought about it because, once again, his sympathies were not far off the CCF. But instead of that, he said, no, I'm going to stay and I'm going to run for the leadership of the party, which he won. And after that became premier, as you know. So there was a certain similarity there because I decided to stay with the Liberal Party, and we won, and I was asked to join the cabinet, which were the greatest political days of my life.
Well, before you got to do that, you had to negotiate. So Bob Rae said, I'm going to hear offers from the Conservatives and from the Liberals. What do you remember about those negotiations?
Well, other than that he handled it very, very well, and there was a little bit of cloak and dagger stuff because we had to meet confidentially. We couldn't open it to the press. You were one of them. We had one meeting involving people crawling through a window so that we could meet without the press knowing it went on, and we left the meeting and the headline was the Liberals and NDP meet surreptitiously or something, or the Tories and all the rest of it. It was quite interesting. And anyway, we reached an agreement and a list of policy areas which we agreed on that the new government would enact forthwith and that the NDP would support, which they did. And I tried to introduce a bill which was not on the agreement, and they got up and informed me that that wasn't on the list and they weren't going to support it. And I better bloody well withdraw it, which I did.
Which bill was that?
I don't remember. and I would probably find it, but it was nothing very dramatic. I was surprised that they had thought this was a matter of high difference.
Well, that accord that you're talking about banned extra billing by doctors, a lot more social housing spending, full public funding for the Roman Catholic school system, pay equity, freedom of information legislation. There was a whole raft of issues. Was there anything in there you really disagreed with?
No, I was all gung-ho on that thing, but you mentioned the full funding of Catholic schools, which in a sense precipitated many things associated with where we found ourselves at that point. Because without going into all the detail, Bill Davis called an election on that and won it beautifully and got a large majority after John Robarts, having met with the group on full funding, which led to the NDP and the Liberals indicating that they were positive about going forward. And when Bill Davis took over the premiership, after we settled down a little bit, it wasn't not immediate at all, but he got up and said, as long as I'm premier, there will be no further funding to the Roman Catholic schools. And by the way, I'm going to have an election next month. That was a disastrous election for the Liberals, but we survived. Then to have him finally decide to leave the premiership, and after doing so, he announced the funding for the Roman Catholic schools, because he promised as long as he was premier, it would never be increased. So there's something odd about that, which I've never been able to convince the brighter people in the community that was a little underhanded.
I gotcha. Let me take you to June 26, 1985. You are standing there outdoors on a beautiful day in front of Queen's Park, and you are sworn in as the first Liberal treasurer in 42 years. What was that moment like for you?
Ecstatic is one word. You're right, it was a glorious day. And I'll tell you, I just couldn't stop smiling. It was well done. The governor was a good friend of mine.
John Black-Aird.
John Black-Aird. To receive the oath from him was a special pleasure. And I turned around and walked all alone across the lawn and across the busy Queen's Park Circle to that beautiful building, the Frost Building, which was the treasury of the province of Ontario. And I walked in there, and the guard nodded to me or touched his cap perhaps and said, "Mr. Nixon, you'll be wanting the 7th floor." So I went and pushed a 7 on the elevator, which was the top, and went up there, and there was an office, a lady at the desk, and she said, "Mr. Nixon, welcome. Your office is straight ahead. Go right ahead." So I walked in and sat down and became the Treasurer of Ontario. I have since wondered where the devil the Deputy Minister was. It turned out that the Deputy Minister had expected to be appointed the Chief of the Civil Service. He was long-serving and very competent and anxious for the promotion. But instead of that, he'd been made the head of the Treasury Civil Service, which itself was an extremely important job. But he considered that much less than what he had deserved, and started off strangely uncooperative, sort of blaming me for being the unexperienced farmer coming on the scene, which I was, and reveling in it.
So you guys got off to a bad start.
Very bad start.
Did you have him replaced?
He works for the Premier, as you know. The deputies, of course, are hired by the Premier. It wasn't long before I spoke to David and said, this is not going to be satisfactory. And there was a change that was made, and somebody else replaced him. It was much better as far as I was concerned.
Apropos of what the deputy said, you'd been in opposition for 23 years. Was there any doubt in your mind that now switching over to government, you could do the job?
No, none whatsoever. Because that's, you don't go in there knowing how to do it. That's the whole point. You go in there as a citizen, and you're given the responsibility, and you've given expert people to advise you, and even advise you on the final decisions. But there are always alternatives. Do you like this or do you like that, and what else? And the answer is, well, I don't like any of that. What else do you have? I mean, it's a remarkable experience, an absolutely wonderful experience. If I were in a different group of people, I would say it's sort of like sex. It's just absolutely amazing. And I remember our meeting rooms. There'd be different groups meeting with me, trying to bring me up to speed, and then afterwards discussing the various issues and reaching some sort of conclusion, and the sort of thing that I would take to Cabinet and try to get Cabinet to agree to. Although when the Treasurer brings things into Cabinet, usually it's pretty well decided ahead of time, but the discussions are okay. There was one occasion where a Cabinet Minister, one of my colleagues, interrupted the Cabinet meeting and asked the whole group to reverse me on something, which you might want to pursue sometime.
Oh, I think we're definitely going to pursue that. Can I guess that it was Jim Bradley, the Environment Minister?
That's the boy.
That's the guy. And what was the issue?
Well, there was a large allocation for new headquarters buildings that were going to be built on the south side of the 401. And it was quite a large allocation, and I had decided that we would not proceed with it at this time. And he was a very aggressive new minister, and that's when we didn't even have a minister of the environment until fairly recently before that. And he was very aggressively and a very good minister of the environment, and he wanted the government to show that this was one of our main things to do. And the entire cabinet, with the premier's agreement, agreed that they would proceed with the building. So I was reversed.
How'd you feel about that?
I didn't like it very much. On the other hand, Bradley and I have been the very best of arguing friends.
You guys fought a lot in cabinet, didn't you? You two.
Well, we had lots of stuff to do.
That's a non-answer. You guys fought did you ever hit him?
Did I ever what?
Hit him.
No.
Did you ever swear at him?
What? No, I don't think so.
I want to circle back for a second, back to your first day on the job. How often did you think of your father on that day?
It's interesting because his whole life was at Queen's Park, essentially. I often thought of his role there and his references at home to what he was doing. It was a little bit different in those days. I mean, I wasn't even born when he was a cabinet minister. He was in the cabinet when he was 28 years old in 1919. So, I wasn't around for that experience.
That was the United Farmers Government.
That's right. And but he returned to cabinet with Mr. Hepburn, the Hepburn government, in 1934, and I was 6 years old. So I do remember talking politics, and I remember seeing Mr. Hepburn speak to the crowd in the arena in Paris, Ontario, and being very overwhelmed by the cheering and shouting and laughing because Hepburn told a wonderful bunch of jokes. It was always amusing. I didn't know what the jokes were about, but I knew everybody was having a wonderful time.
I presume at some point you thought to yourself, I sure wish my dad had been here to see this.
Well, of course, he never did leave the legislature, and if he were still alive, he would have still been the member. So I would have still been watching him doing it.
And despite that, he's the longest serving member ever anyway.
By just a day or two, or a month or two, maybe a year and a half.
The Liberals, I remember hearing them say over and over again that 42 years of Tories in power at Queen's Park compromised the public service. And you thought the public servant were all a bunch of Tories in disguise. When you eventually got into government, did that turn out to be the case?
It did not, although I felt that the guy that I've already described, who was the first deputy treasurer, felt that a regret that things were not the way they were and that the world was not going forward the way it should. But I would think, I thought that essentially, and David, the premier, made it clear to the civil service that we're depending on you. There was never any thought that somehow we had our own special civil service that worked for us and another bunch of people that sent out the checks and addressed the mail. We really used it very well, I thought.
Let me ask you about your relationship with Premier Peterson, because he's the new premier and he puts you, a former party leader, in his cabinet. And I think certainly in my lifetime that had never happened before or since. It could have been awkward, was it?
No, not at all. No. We had a very good personal relationship and still do. I write a comment daily to my friends, and every now and then I get a response from him, and sometimes it'll be something like, well, not in my time, or good point, or, it's not an extensive response, but it's nice to hear from him.
Did he ever say to you, or let me reverse that, did you ever say to him when an issue came up, David, when I was leader, we handled things this way?
Never.
You never did that?
No, because he was there when I was leader, and as a member of the caucus. Maybe he was not actually. He may have come in and we'd sat as private members together. Mm-hmm. But we had a really good relationship and still do.
Your first cabinet meeting, I think, actually happened the day you were sworn in. Do you remember anything in particular from that first cabinet meeting?
I do not. I can sort of think of actually entering the cabinet room for the first time, so this is where it happens, and seeing my friends, former fellow political battlers in the field, sitting around as cabinet ministers with the premier there, and thinking, this is great. But I can't remember a thing about what we did.
Let me jog your memory a little bit then, because David Peterson, in his acceptance speech, talked about creating a government without walls or barriers, and apparently a nice old lady took him at his word and entered the cabinet room and sat there with you in cabinet.
I remember that, yeah.
And everybody was looking around the room saying, who's she, who's she, who's she? And she was just a member of the public who thought cabinet meetings were going to be open.
I remember that, and she was ushered out with given a cup of tea.
Right on. You used to joke that you weren't like a lot of other treasurers, some big shot from Bay Street, but rather a parsimonious old farmer from Brant County. As treasurer, were you really all that parsimonious in your view?
No, I was a big-time spender and a big-time taxer. That was the difference. That I didn't actually do the spending. My colleagues did. And while I could argue in cabinet, a faint little voice saying we can't afford it, the answer is, well, raise the taxes. And actually, nobody would ever say that to me because nobody wants the taxes raised. On the other hand, I raised the revenue. Very last year we were in existence, an argument can be made that the ordinary account was balanced, not the capital account, but the ordinary account was balanced.
Operating.
Outright, and I actually made a $40 million donation to the provincial debt to reduce it. There's a lot to that story because we were just on the verge of a serious economic collapse, which began in 1990, 1991, one of the worst we've experienced, and which had precipitated our early election. But that, I don't know whether you're going to.
No, we're going to get to that. We're not there yet. When you were the provincial treasurer, Michael Wilson was the federal finance minister. He was a conservative, you were a liberal. He's a big Bay Street guy, you're a parsimonious old farmer from Brant County. You wouldn't think that you two would get on well, but did you?
Yes, we did. And he called regular meetings of all the treasurers or ministers of finance in Ottawa, and we were sitting in order of something or other, and I always sat to Michael's right hand. And so during pauses, we became quite chatty friends. And he was a very fine guy.
1987, your party wins the largest majority government in Ontario history, 95 out of 130 seats. What did you think about that?
Well earned. Well justified.
Were you concerned at all?
No, I didn't know enough about politics to realize that kind of a majority brought its own problems.
Such as?
But they were problems that the premier had to cope with. Nobody else had to cope with them. He had to see that our colleagues all felt reasonably satisfied. The present premier has solved that by giving every one of the Conservative caucus at Queen's Park a job of preferment, that is additional pay, in the government of Ontario. Every single member of his caucus.
Except one.
Oh, is there one that's been left out?
Not Lisa MacLeod, but everybody else, yes. Yeah. But I wonder, I'm thinking about Frank McKenna's line now, because, when he was Premier McKenna and he had that election where he won every single seat, he once told me he was not all that happy on election night because he knew that the public had overreacted to give him that many seats and that they would probably overreact at some point in the future to correct that imbalance. You never thought about that?
And I don't have that long-term view. When you have something like that happen, I don't think you sit down immediately and say, oh my God, what have I done? And if he were thoughtful enough to do that, well, it serves him right. He got into trouble.
Okay, Prime Minister Brian Mulroney introduces the Free Trade Agreement. The official position of the Ontario Liberal government is to oppose it. I'd like to know what the personal position of the Treasurer of Ontario was at that time.
Well, I should have resigned because the position was officially opposing the free trade initiative. But I was raised as a liberal free trader, going right back to Laurier. And I felt it very strongly. So I went to see the Premier and I said, I've got a real problem here. And he says, no, you don't have a problem. We can handle that. I'll see that you're not put on the spot for representation on that side, and everything will be okay. And of course, I didn't want to quit. And if the boss was saying, I'll look after it, then I thought, good, I can stay.
Did you come close to resigning over this issue?
Well, I didn't come close to saying to the Premier, okay, I hear what you're saying, but I really think I have to quit, because I wanted to stay. So I stayed.
One of the things you did as treasurer was to eliminate Ontario's health insurance premiums. Why did you want to do that?
Well, I was looking at the cost of the staff that we had that was looking after billing everybody and seeing that their fees were properly checked off and balanced. And I came to the conclusion that costs of administering it were about the same as what we were taking in. So I turned the key on it and closed her down. And so the whole thing was covered from the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
Now, 6 years later, Mike Harris got elected and he brought in a so-called fair share health levy, which essentially returned things to the way they were. What did you think of that?
Paid it.
Okay. As we get to 1990, as treasurer, you would have known better than anybody else that there was an awful recession on the horizon and it was coming. How did that factor into your advice to Premier Peterson as it relates to election timing?
Well, the news from the experts at Treasury to me was a complete surprise, because the economy had been growing nicely, our revenues had been climbing, I was balancing the budget, and then these people grimly said, this is going to be one of the worst recessions in history. And after they left and the political people were left talking about it, the Premier said, well, what are we going to do? Because our re-election will come just at the worst point of what is projected, the very worst point. And we can hold our nose and do our best, or we could have an election early and win it on the prosperity that we have been associated with. And so there was a discussion all the way around, and he decided to go for the election. And I supported him in that. And I don't think anybody else in the cabinet supported him in it.
Well, your MPPs, I'm told, had a caucus retreat at Geneva Park to discuss election timing. And you had some members
God, I don't remember
making the argument in favor of an early call, and some making the opposite argument. And apparently they took a vote of caucus afterwards, and it was 85 against going early, 4 in favor of going early. Why was the caucus so adamantly opposed to going early?
Well, I guess they thought it was risky calling an early election, and that we had a good majority, and that we should continue and governing on the basis that we'd been elected to do so. I had a special pressure in that I was House Leader. And since we had a big majority, and the NDP was the official opposition, and there were 2 or 3 front bench members who thought, well, we're sent here for something, and maybe it's driving Nixon nuts is why we're sent here. And it was a daily game of ordering the business of the House and so on. And there are many instances. I wish I could name the people I'm thinking of, because they're all good people and smart people.
Well, I bet Mike Brio was one of them.
Brio was a very tough guy.
Dave Cook might have been one of them.
Cook was probably the one that got under my skin the best or the worst.
Because?
Well, I mean, on one occasion, you know, I had a group of close friends in our village of St. George. I used to fill up my car with gas and go in, and there'd be these old boys in there having coffee and talking politics and ribbing me. And there were lots of Tories, lots of NDPs, and 1 or 2 people admitting they were Liberals. But I decided to invite them all, and there was a group of maybe 20, and got them tickets in the gallery, and they were there a certain day. After prayers, and we were doing business, I got up, and it used to be quite informal, but I say, oh, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to bring your attention to the fact that in the gallery, and I was just 2 or 3 words long, and this guy hopped up and said, point of order, what's he doing, think he doing, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, there's no order of business that allows the treasurer to introduce his friends. Yet. And they had to sit down, and we didn't do it. Mind you, it's done all the time, as you know, all the time.
Now it is, yeah.
And that's probably the thing that's stuck in my mind, that you're prepared to insult me in front of all my friends, you son of a go in there. Yeah. So we're going to have an election, and I'm going to put your head right under the tractor wheel, and we'll find out who wins. Well, I found out. And I came out of the election leader of the Liberal rump, which was in the official opposition position.
Mm-hmm. I want to do one more story of you as treasurer, because I recall a day when they were heckling you so badly and ringing the bells so badly. This was budget day. And you were unable to actually stand and introduce the budget into the legislature. So what'd you do?
That was even more annoying than what I already described, because the pages all had copies of the bound budget ready to distribute. And it's always been done. As soon as the treasurer starts to speak, these guys rush out. They're young little boys and girls who do this in the legislature, and it's kind of a tradition. So I got up and said, you know, Mr. Speaker, I move, order something. And these kids all came out, and the NDP got up and said, order, point of order, what, we can't allow this, we can't allow this. We have to, you know, we're going to do, and we're interrupting the business, and all those books have got to be collected and taken back out of here. And oh God, I could have killed them, but they were killing me. You know? And I don't remember what the upshot was.
You took the budget, you walked over to the clerk's table, you slammed it down on the table, and you walked out. You said, there, I've tabled the budget. And there was no budget speech, but...
Yeah, well...
But there was a budget.
I'm delighted that I did that. Are you sure?
Oh yeah, I remember it pretty well.
All right, well, you're the sort of depository of all that kind of riffraff.
Did you say suppository?
No.
Repository, okay. I am told that during that 1990 election campaign, that you were getting into so many fights with your constituents as you were campaigning, telling them all to F off, that at some point your campaign manager pulled you off the hustings because every interaction you had was losing you votes, not getting you votes. Is that true?
It's precisely true, yeah. And the constituency had changed a bit, and there was several municipalities to the south and east of Brantford that were tacked on, and they hadn't been pretty conservative down there. So I would spend quite a bit of time straightening it up. But as I was on the street, people would almost buttonhole me, saying, "You people called this unnecessary election," and really giving me the dickens about it. And the maddening thing is that their criticism was correct. So all I could do was fume. We didn't have worked out the proper reasons. It even started when Dave called the election. Somebody tied himself to a chair and was yapping about the election and wouldn't shut up and wouldn't stop.
He's a Toronto City Councillor today.
Yeah, well, that's good for Toronto. God help them.
Gord Perks is his name. And he handcuffed himself to the chair there and kind of attacked the Premier on his opening news conference.
That's right.
Yeah. The most noteworthy thing I think you did in that campaign was promise to drop the sales tax by a point if the Liberals were reelected. Did you agree with that policy?
At one stage, when things started to go bad, but at one stage, we knew that it was absolutely disintegrating. And somebody running the campaign, in an effort to save the Titanic, said, "I know, let's lower the sales tax." And they spoke to me, and I said, "You can't do that. We can't do that." And of course, we could do that. And it was decided that we were going to do that. And so I was told that we were going to lower the sales tax, and I announced it.
You were a good soldier about it, but did you agree with it?
No. But on the other hand, if we had won, we would have done it, and we would have done something else.
It would have cost you nearly $1 billion to do that.
Yeah, and actually, if I were there now, I'd whack another point on it right now.
You kick it up a point.
Take it up, yeah.
Yeah, you'd raise it a point.
Because we can't pay for what we're doing.
The election didn't go the way you guys wanted it to, obviously.
Big time.
And as we sit here today, September 6th, 2024, we are 34 years to the day of that election. Did you think, okay, Bob Ray's going to be in here for a short while and they'll have their fun, but we'll be back? Did you think that on election night?
No.
What'd you think?
I thought Bob Ray had won the election. And I don't think that far. It's people like you that can look back and look forward. I can look back, but I can't look forward very well. All I knew is that we had to be called. David, who had been personally defeated, called the caucus together, and we wept on each other's shoulders a little bit, but most people knew they were beaten and they couldn't wait to get doing something else. So some of them maybe repairing their political, but lots of them totally leaving politics. Dave never looked back. He had lots of interesting things and he has since been a real ornament to the community and the university and at the Toronto Star and so on. He's done very well. So no, and we had a meeting and sort of said, well, we've got to organize. We better have somebody leading us there. Who could possibly do that? I know, little Bob, he'll be the leader for a while. And it worked out fine. I had a lot of fun, and I had a lot of fun with Bob Ray. And I've sometimes thought, why don't I get out the answers and find out what we were talking about? Because I have positive memories of doing business with him.
But you were leader of the opposition at the time.
Yes, that's right.
You were after his neck on a regular basis.
Oh, we had to, and we had good people and we had money that had been applied to the parties previously. I had more money to spend on research than I knew what to do with. My office manager kept hiring more people. I said, we got too many bodies around here. We aren't doing anything. And it's crazy. Anyway, we finally got it under control. But then Bob Ray came over one day right after prayers. I don't know, they still have prayers?
It's a different one every day, but yes.
Oh, well, this was the same one every day. Anyway, he came over and leaned on my desk with his elbow and said, we were chatting away, and he said, I'm looking for somebody to head up our office in London, England. Would you do that for us? I said, I'll have to consider that. And then I said, I've just considered it, yes.
Really? It went down like that?
Well, I think it did, because I'm a great Anglophile, and the idea of going over there appealed to me enormously. And we'd just really been beaten, and I'd had my turn anyway as leader. There was no point in me hanging around if I could do something else, and I certainly enjoyed that.
That was actually the 4th time you were Ontario Liberal leader.
Yeah. Well,
What did you make of that?
Well, 4 times a note.
Right on. A Nixon family member, I don't have to tell you, either federally or provincially, has represented this part of Ontario from 1919 to 2004. That's 3 generations. Your dad, you, and your daughter, Jane. Would you like to see someone from the Nixon family representing this area at some point in the future again?
Oh, yes, but not aggressively.
What does that mean?
I mean, I'm not ready to take some kid by the shoulders and say, it's your duty to do this, because it certainly isn't. If you can do it and you want to do it, fine. But most of this next generation are doing very well, thank you very much.
But I imagine this is a conversation you have had with one of your grandkids at some point?
Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's just something that we thought about.
As we sit here in September 2004, you are 96 years old. You have outlived your father, your political hero, by more than a quarter of a century. You led the Ontario Liberals on 4 separate occasions. My last question for you is, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm fortunate to be retired in a comfortable home with nice people. And my 4 kids are all grown up and established in various ways and not too far away from me and pay a lot of attention to me. And I'm well served that way, so I really have no complaints. There are nice friends here at the retirement place as well. And the food is good, and we have a glass of ice water at our hand at each meal. I'm just talking about the things that when you get old, you can appreciate. The servings are small, the food is good, the waitresses are friendly and nice, and life is okay.
Did you ever imagine you would outlive your father by 26 years and counting?
No, because, I'm not sort of an exercising demon or anything like that. I have never had a tradition of bodily care and renovation. It's just the opposite. My diet has always been very heavy on the sugar and starch side. And as a farmer, I had serious pitchforking exercises, but I've never been interested in any sport at all, like any sport. And so I find that you and your mother, who is a good friend of mine, who is also totally involved in baseball and all sorts of things, I have found unbelievably interesting and different for me to actually go to the ball game and sit there for the whole game. Oh, gosh.
Do you still care and or follow politics either federally or provincially now?
Oh yeah, I follow it quite closely. And Jane and I are in pretty close contact and chat politically and so on. But we don't eat the stuff, to tell you the truth. And we both keep sighing relief that really we don't give a damn, so to speak. I mean, we do give a damn, but I'm probably more interested in what's going on in the United States right now than I am in what's going on in Ontario.
Is there anything you'd like to add that I haven't asked?
Nothing other than it's good to have you here on the home ground in Brant County. Everybody here watches your program. Well, almost everybody.
It's great to see you again.
Thank you.
May we do this many more times.
All right. Look forward to it.